life living and making a living can sometimes wear us out, grind us down, and dull our senses. So for a keen mind and a sharp contributive edge that can make it all easier and better and more productive, let's take some time to sharpen our axe. Stay with us right now for Life Talk.
Hello, I'm Gina Fitt, and you've either surfed to or purposely selected Life Talk with Bern Moses. Welcome to another in our series of ongoing verbal essays brought to you in this television format. It's a pleasure to have you with us today. Bern, we've been doing this show for about a year now, and we've had a lot of people calling in talking about how they feel and the struggles and challenges that they face each day in their life. And before the show, you gave me a list of feelings, and you said these are common feelings that people call in with, and you wanted me to kind of go through this list and give you an idea of some of the things I'm feeling. And so I did that, and it was interesting because I felt grateful for the opportunity to be alive and have two beautiful children and to be working every day and the challenges that I face, and I realized that it makes me feel useful, that I can engage in constructive activities, and I felt impatient, like I'm not doing enough, all the things I want to do, and there's so much more out there for me. And I felt stimulated and excited and challenged, and then I was waiting for the show to start, and I started to feel a little bit relieved, knowing that, oh, I've only got another hour, and I can go home and eat dinner, and you know, and then I started to feel a little bit depressed because it was taking longer than I wanted to get everything accomplished. And as I was going through the list, though, it occurred to me that as I was reading these feelings, I started to feel the feeling just by looking at it on the paper. I could relate to that feeling.
Yeah, this is a consequence of a lot of thought that came out of the years. For me, it started back in the 60s and 70s. I was frankly in overwhelm. You know, when you cut through the socioeconomic veneer that people present to the world, you know, that sense of confidence and, you know, the business face, you call it, that you find a lot of hurt and aggravation and upset and wonderment and bewilderment and overwhelm and, you know, sometimes the quiet desperation that the poets write about. And it's quite common. And we've all had our times, there's no question. And back in the 60s and 70s, I was in overwhelm. I lost a wife and 3 children, and they hadn't died in a fire. I mean, they were just gone. They were out of my life. It wasn't my intention, and it was incredibly painful and a severe bereavement. Somewhere along in there, too, I lost a national company with hundreds of salespeople who were dependent upon this and growing and developing in it, and all of a sudden, in a matter of days, it was all gone. And that's a story within itself. And that's just a couple of items. And I was frankly in a more tedious state, which we can talk about a little later on perhaps in the next week or two. But I was suicidal. It didn't seem like life was worth living, frankly. But I don't know if it was cowardice or courage, but I didn't do it. But I did keep reading and wondering and thinking and watching and writing and trying to figure my way through it. And there was a point in time when I began to really hear the rumors that women were better at life's experiences, gains and losses than men were.
Really?
That they seemed to absorb that better. Now, I find in subsequent years that that's not really a gender issue. It's just that some people are better at it than others. But women have a general reputation for being a little bit better at it, being less stressful, because they identify their feelings a little bit better, presumably, and they have someone they can communicate with about them. Of course, that's other women. In order to get in touch with the woman in me, and this was probably a quarter century before it was popular, I began to read women's magazines, which in itself is quite an experience. There was one magazine, I believe it was New Woman, that was written in a female gender that gave me an insight into being left out. As women have been reading male gender literature for centuries. And I know in reading New Woman, there was a sense of being left out, not being a part of things. And so that drew some empathy out of me about that. It didn't seem to help a lot. I tried to get my mind over into the body of a woman, and that's hard for a heterosexual. And I felt vulnerable and physically inept, and that doesn't mean a thing. You know, it's just that's the way I felt. But then I began to hear it was about feelings. And so I began to say, well, okay, well, how do I feel? And quite frankly, I couldn't come up with a good list. I couldn't seem to focus in on whatever that was.
You couldn't tell how you were feeling?
No, I just couldn't make up the list. In fact,
Really?
in essays that we do, live essays, even today, I will have a group of people and I'll say, if you would how do you feel this evening? Just make a list. And people will put 2 or 3, 4 words down, and that's about as far as they get. But then I go to another issue that had developed from this experience years ago. Having recognized that I couldn't identify my feelings well, I went to the dictionary and I began to peruse the dictionary. And every time I found a feeling word, I would make a 3x5 card, okay, and if necessary, write the definition of it in the back. Usually wasn't necessary. I found hundreds of feelings words, hundreds of them. And what I would do when I got oppressed, depressed, or overwhelmed or something, I would sit down with my cards and I would thumb through them, kind of shift through, and I would lay aside any card that seemed to identify how I felt. And I would end up with quite a stack. Interestingly enough, every time I completed the exercise, I was aware that I always felt what?
Better.
Better, yeah.
Yes.
Just identifying them. And having the inventory list really helped a lot.
Do you think that gives us power over our feelings to be able to identify
Oh,
them clearly?
no question about it. In fact, there's pretty good evidence that if we don't at any given moment know how we feel, that we're in a state of stress and anxiety. Therefore, how many people do you think live in a state of stress and anxiety? Because it's not an easy exercise to identify how you feel. It was enhanced, however, by my cards, which in time got coffee-stained and dog-eared and what have you. And so I figured, well, it has to be a better way. And so what I did, I culled the cards. I removed some redundant words, and I got it down to still several hundred. And then what I did, I shuffled them very carefully, making sure there was no semblance of order in them. And I began to turn the cards over one at a time and came up with this particular list. It was a short list because certainly there are more feelings, but it was a pretty good overview. There's 168 words on here. And what I did was to just take a small selection of those and made a short list for you this evening.
Oh, I see.
And you went through and you previously marked them. I know that no matter how many words you have marked there, you'd mark more if you were working off this list.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Now, what I wanted to do to kind of establish what I call a formula, a life formula, was to begin the premise by asking you how you felt this evening. And I believe you marked some words, and if you don't mind, would you tell me what they were?
Okay.
As we go down through here.
I felt grateful.
Grateful, okay.
And
I believe you said useful. Mm-hmm.
And impatient.
Okay, understandable.
And stimulated, thinking about being able to coming to do the show. And
Okay.
focused on what we were going to talk about.
Good. Mm-hmm.
Focused on looking at this list of feelings.
Mm-hmm.
And accepted because I enjoy the people here that we work with in this production. And I felt a little bit relieved knowing that it was soon going to be time to relax and put my feet up, and depressed, a little bit depressed when I started thinking about all the things that I wanted to do that I hadn't got done. But it occurred to me, Bern, as I looked through this list, that I could actually choose the feelings that I felt on this list. So why couldn't I choose the feelings themselves and internalize them?
Yes, I believe you can. I believe you can. It's incredible how effective this can be. What we typically will do is have people mark how they feel in a particular evening or an afternoon or whatever, and then we turn the page and say, we'll make a list of emotions. These are the feelings. Now make a list of emotions. And if you would, what list did you come up with? What were some of the words that you had?
Well, when I think of emotion, I think of really gut-wrenching feelings like fear. And hatred and joy.
Okay.
And love.
Okay.
And anger. And grief. And loneliness.
Good.
And sorrow. And ecstasy,
Okay.
just like, yes.
Yes, okay. Any others?
Well,
Sad seems to be popular.
yeah, sad is probably.
Or sadness. Okay. I think that's enough for the exercise because we are limited for time. Let me go back and talk about this a little bit. There's just a couple of us here this evening, but there could be 20, there could be 200, there could be 2,000, or there could be 20,000 people. And with this list of 168 words, I'm confident that after we took about 4 or 5 minutes to mark down how we felt, okay, we could go around and check all the lists, Gina, and they'd all be different.
Absolutely.
They'd all be different, which has to be examined, because in the purest sense of the word, that's somewhat irrational. Because everyone is having the same experience at the same time, the same speaker up front, knows everything is essentially the same. Why would there be such an array of feelings? Well, it's pretty good evidence that what we're doing is carrying the past or the future around with us, and that influences how we feel at the moment. Is it any wonder then that there's a lot of stress and anxiety and inappropriate behavior out here when feelings affect our behavior and we all feel so differently even though we're having the same experience? I mean, that's kind of fascinating. I am convinced that if we could take, let's just arbitrarily say 1,000 people and bring them together every evening for a month, okay, and focus on just being there, divorcing ourselves from the past and the future as best we could, and just say, okay, how do you feel right now, all right? And have people mark the list. And do it again and again and again, night after night, and then maybe every other night for another month or so, and every third night for a month. After a while, I'm perfectly confident that all the lists would become very, very similar. They would be in concert.
You know, it's so difficult to be in the moment.
Oh,
it's incredibly
yes.
difficult.
It takes
We
practice.
don't live for right now.
Yeah.
We so much. I mean, it's hard for me to even put meaning into this moment, unless it's, you know, you're watching a sunset or something really
Right.
incredible. But most of the time, your thoughts are focused on what just happened or what you're going to do next, or what all these things that drive you. And it's not
sometimes
what's
it
happening
comes
now.
from 40 years ago. Well, not for you, but I mean, but you know, 10 and 20 and 30 years ago
Absolutely.
can influence how we feel right now. And it takes a matter of consciousness and practice to be able to get into the moment and stay there, because I'll tell you, when we find that ourselves in the moment, chances are we're in a pretty good state of mind, because it's a safe place. Like right now, right this moment, wherever we happen to be, people are going to feel, well, yeah, I'm okay right now. You know what I mean? And so what we could do is to accumulate a whole lot of good moments.
Then it would become something significant.
We'd have a great life. Sure.
But, you know, instead, I think we think of the moment as a transitory point. But it's like getting in a car to go somewhere, and you never get there.
Yeah.
But that's what you keep anticipating,
That's
is that
right.
you're going to be there.
And the tragedy is you want to be there now, and you can't be. Therefore, you get out of the moment, and therefore that's where the stress is.
Right. Or else you're looking out the rear window at where you've been.
Exactly. More about feelings, too. The more you do the list, the more feelings you will appreciate. And as we find that, for example, I'd recommend that people call in. As a matter of fact, I can probably give them a number here. Let's put it over here. 1-800-661-3490. And just call and say, I was watching the show on the Life Formula, and I'd like a feelings list. And we'll send one of these to them, and they can get a ream run off. And I'd recommend going through that every day for a while until you became articulate about identifying your feelings, because it really, really does help. So it's 1-800-661-3490, and we'll send a free list out, and we'll send a schedule of the TV show and this type of thing, and make it worth their while for calling. Feelings are kind of fascinating, great communication tools. Now, as we find, for example, that if a spouse or two spouses, parent and child, two children, a boss and employee, neighbors fussing over a fence or a tree, any two people or more having an aggravation or an upset, if they would take time out, sit down with the feelings list, mark how they felt about that issue, just focus on the issue and write down how they felt about it, and then maybe write some short sentences or mini essays using those words, and then come together, swap the list, and read it carefully, maybe 2 or 3 times. Once just kind of read it, and once with as much love as they could muster, and then one with as much compassion and empathy as they could generate, and then communicate about those feelings, and harmony would reign. It's incredible. Some years ago, I came together with 18 couples in Fort Worth, Texas. And I mean, you could cut the stress and anxiety and the angst with a knife. It was terrible. There was a lot of divorces pending there. And all we did Friday and Saturday was to take marital subjects and send, we'll say like it'd be sex or the budget or the children or punishment or the job or the vacation or the in-laws, and take these subjects and have people go off by themselves, indicate how they felt about it, come back together again, swap the list, and talk. And by Sunday, Gina, everyone was happy with the idea of bringing in the clergy. In other words, priests and pastors were brought in and everyone renewed their marriage vows. And some of those people are still holding hands after all these years because they learned how to communicate and dialogue and addressing their feelings. Now, one of the issues is that feelings are never right or wrong. It's just how you feel, okay? Has nothing to do with anything. They can influence your behavior if you're not conscious. But the thing is, the feeling itself is totally permissible.
Don't you think they constantly influence our behavior?
Oh, absolutely.
Every
absolutely.
moment of the day?
Absolutely. Particularly if we're not conscious. They need not, but they probably will if we go into a by rote state or work subliminally like we typically tend to do. You know what I mean by that? In other words, you can drive to work and not realize how you got there.
Oh,
Have you ever done that? Yeah.
Daily.
Yeah. A lot of what we do unconsciously because the subconscious is taken over and say, hey, I'll handle that. And what it's up to is handling it the way it's always handled it. You know what I mean? In other words, they don't want anything new and different. It's kind of fascinating. Feelings are fascinating. We know that, like I say, they're not right or wrong, therefore what are they? Well, feelings are feelings. That's all you can say about them. That's not enough. I mean, maybe we need another definition, so let's take it in another step and say that feelings are physical manifestations of emotions. That's by themselves, they're fairly insignificant, okay? But it is the subconscious way of communicating with and to and from the outside world in order to survive, okay? But the feelings themselves are emanating from emotions, and so we say, what kind of emotions are they? Well, fear, hate, joy, love, these are all fairly typical. Now, the tough news is that there's lots of feelings, hundreds of them. So, and any one of them can affect us at any given moment in time. However, the good news is there's only two emotions, only two. Now, I don't care what literature you read, I think we're being misled in a lot of cases because it boils down to two primary emotions and all other feelings emanate from them. Therefore, some of these would be feelings that we just listed here. And so we got to determine those emotions, and we're submitting that one of them is love. Okay? Now, that may not be the best word in the world, but we do identify it as one of the primary emotions. In one sense of the word, it should be or could be nurturance. You know, the capacity to nurture, okay, one and the other. Now, we have to look for a dichotomy in order to set up a formula. And so typically we're looking for the exact opposite of love, and quite typically it's considered to be what?
Hate.
Hate, yeah. However, we're submitting that it's not. As a matter of fact, the dichotomy of love is fear. Those are the two primary emotions. Now, if what I just said is true, okay, all these other are feelings that are emanating from these two primary emotions.
Oh, that's
so it should
interesting.
be, yeah, it should be very easy to pick it out. See? So, for example, if hate as a feeling had to be emanating from fear or love, what would it obviously be?
Fear.
It would be a fear word. Joy would be
Love.
a love word. Anger,
Fear.
fear word. Grief,
Um,
okay, I mean, interject. Grief is a love word.
Okay.
Bereavement is the fear word. As bereavement is an adjective that describes the symptoms that come from loss. Grief is the solution. In other words, we should be celebrating grief, not suffering it. And there's been a huge misunderstanding about that in our society. But we're going to make grief at this point a love word.
Okay.
Loneliness would be
fear.
fear. Sorrow,
Fear.
fear. Ecstasy,
Love.
love, and sadness,
Fear.
fear. Now we can go back over here quickly to the words that you marked. Grateful would be
Love.
love. Useful,
Love.
love. Impatient,
Fear.
fear. Stimulated, love. Focused,
Love.
love. Accepted, relieved, and depressed would be fear. Okay? And so just to run through that really helps. Then we have some tools that we'll be talking about in the next week or two about how to purposely and always be able to select the emotional state that you're in. That's pretty fascinating.
Oh, wonderful.
That puts you in command of the direction your life is taking.
Yes.
Yeah? Now, in order to continue with this, what I would like to do is to go move toward a thing I call a time lifeline. It's a little parenthetical here because in most of the essays that I do, I'm going to be talking about a time lifeline. And what that represents is the time and the energy that you and I are going to expend, okay, between this moment now and the questionable place in the future when we cease to exist. That's when we die. Okay, now, This is a question mark, by the way, because we don't know when that's going to be. I've had several instances in my life, people that I've known, been acquainted with, who just ceased to exist. They didn't cry out for help. They just stopped living. There was one lady who died in Aspen some years ago. About 4 years ago, I got a phone call to send out a bereavement tape to her parents. And it was her brother who was calling me, and she had died at Aspen. And so the natural assumption was that she had fallen and been killed in a ski accident. He said, no, the autopsy showed she was dead when she fell.
Really?
They had an aneurysm, and she was gone, and just lost it, of course. And that's just one. I could name on and on. And by the way, it happens at different ages. 17-year-old athletes I've known, and senior citizens that just for some reason. David Frost lost someone on his talk show one night, on a TV talk show. And they asked a question, got an answer, asked a question, got an answer, asked a question, no answer. Asked the question, kind of looked, and then there was a hubbub because this man was gone. His eyes was open, and he'd never cried out for help or anything. He just stopped living. And so we don't know when that is. It could be this evening for either one of us or anybody that we know. That's a reality. Or for some of us, it could be 100 years from now. That's my intention. Anyway, here's the thing. If we're going to pass along that time lifeline, or if it's going to pass through us, however we perceive that, we're saying you should probably establish some priorities. And so we're saying that what is the most precious possession that we have while we're here on the planet? Now, I know where the mind goes. It tends to go to our babies, our sweethearts, or perhaps our home property, or life itself, or whatever. But we're going to say that it's the mind, the most precious possession we have, because it's who we've been, who we are, and who we will become. I mean, without the mind, they're going to take that plug anyway and pull it, okay? So mind is the most important possession. Number two, then, would have to be life itself. And that's represented by time and energy that we're allotted. Okay, and in order to make something. All right. Third most important thing is the moment now. And what a shame, like you said, we spend so little time in it, because the only promise that we have is right now. Now, what is that? All right. I'm going to go over here for a second. And a now is a moment in time. And as best as I can figure it, it's somewhere in the neighborhood of a minute and a half. A tenth of a second to a second and a half is about a moment. It could be a minute, but you'd have to be living a pretty slow-paced life. There was a time in our history, perhaps, when a day was considered a moment. I think it was said one time, live one day at a time. Well, that's too much time now. In our life...
So much happens in a day. It's incredible.
How many things can you do in one day to mess up a whole lifetime?
Yeah.
And it's pretty tough. The moment. What's really fascinating is that a lot of things are happening in that moment. In other words, we were just talking about emotions, and I'm going to do this here, that in every moment of our life, okay, awake or sleeping, we are in an emotional state. Okay? In every moment of our life, awake or sleeping, we are in a functional capacity. As all of us are functioning at a cellular or socioeconomic level every moment of our life. What's really fascinating is you take that even further, and in every moment of our life, awake or sleeping, and this is every person on the planet, we are posturing about something or another. And I'll explain that later. In every moment of our life, since we live in chaos, we are subject to change. And like I say, at a cellular or socioeconomic level. And then we are all subject to primal states. Primal states. Look at that. That's pretty messy.
What a clutter.
Yeah. Now, I would say that's stress.
Absolutely.
Because it's going on all the time. And you figure, well, how in the world do we manage that as a society?
Do we?
Yeah, we don't, typically. It is pretty stressful. And the thing of it is, what I wanted to do was to clean that up in some way. Now, we've adapted to it, but still adaptation is a succumbing and accommodation or whatever. And so I wanted to clean that up a little bit. And so what I wanted to do is to go in here and take emotion out of there. Now, I'm just going to take emotion and erase it if I can. And I can't. I thought there was a dry erase marker, but it's not. Okay. Imagine, if you would, if we took that emotion and erased it out of there and pulled it out of that moment, turned it over and examined it, and we would find that it has both love and fear in it. Okay? And that was emotional is both love and fear. And what we're saying is that every moment of your life, you're in love or fear, but never both at exactly the same time. There's just sort of a vacillating kind of a thing, as evidence when you went through the feelings list. Now, say for example, if we could develop an oscillograph, a special oscillograph that we could attach to your mind wave and determine your emotional states, okay? A lot of those graphs, Gina, would probably look like this. You know what I mean? They'd be going up and down. See what I'm saying? There'd be a lot of that going on. Now, what this is, of course, could be the laughter of a baby, a beautiful sunrise or a sunset, a nice piece of music, the smile of a lover. It could be any number of things. This could be a good news, a nice size check. There's all kinds of things that could stimulate us to the point where we would go high into the love mode. And then in the next moment, though, in the next instant, some old memory pops in there. For example, remember an earthquake. Or maybe someone rolls their eyes and shrugs their shoulders at us. Or maybe there's a flicker, a shadow across the wall, and that would give us pause. See what I'm saying? So it's going up and down all the time. Then, can you imagine in our society some of the formulas would look this way? I mean, the graphs would be predominantly fear, and I encounter that every day. There's whole societies that kind of live in this state. And that's a dangerous place to be, and it's a dangerous person to be. Okay, it's not a very happy state. Now, if we can imagine, if we could create a condition where we could create an oscillograph that would look like this.
Above the line.
Above the line. This would be a happy person and a nice person to be with. And this is what the formula that we've designed is designed to do, is to get you above the line and keep you there. Now, we're going to have to move on to next week, and so I hope everybody who's listening will either call, as a matter of fact, they can call Bern. Her name is Moses at 1-800-661-3490. And stay tuned till next week and call us and we'll send you some information on this very thing.
Sounds great.
Okay? And I think that's about it for the evening, and we're going to regroup ourselves and come back next week with all kinds of fervor. And we're going to lead into a real nice formula that makes a difference in people's lives. So once again, this is Life Talk. It's about life, living, and making a living. And I'm Bern.
Moses.
Thank you, Gina.
Thank you, Bern.